Ampallang piercings. We're going to talk about the pros, the cons, the advantages, the disadvantages. Going to give you 5 of each coming up right now on Pros and Cons by a Piercer, episode number 86. So you should probably stick around. For those who are new to the channel, my name is DaVo. I'm a professional body piercer and have been since 1994. I own and operate the Axiom Body Piercing Studio located here in Des Moines, Iowa, inside Skin Kitchen Tattoo. So, when I talk to you about these things, I'm talking to you at a level of expertise that comes from being in the body piercing industry for well over 26 years. Before we get too far into this, I'm going to be talking about male genital piercings. I'm going to be talking about the male genitalia and piercings that involve the sexual part of humanity. If you are easily offended, if you do not want to learn about these things, if you do not want to listen to me talk about them, or if it's not age appropriate in your part of the world, please find something else to watch. There are plenty of videos on body piercing and tattooing on this very channel that are age appropriate and do not talk at all about male genitalia or the piercing of male genitalia. If you're looking for something exciting and thrilling and might give you a little tingle in various parts of your anatomy, you're going to be disappointed. This is solely going to be educational for those that are considering getting this piercing, or maybe they're the partner of someone who's getting this piercing and trying to figure out whether or not it's going to be a good choice for them. Before we get too far into this, I should explain, this is one of a handful of male genital piercings that I personally have never done and will not do. The reason for that is the person that I apprenticed under did not do them. So they didn't train me to do them, and I don't feel comfortable just experimenting on people, especially when it comes to something that could potentially be very dangerous on clients without the supervision of somebody that has experience with that piercing. So I've never done one. And if you came in today and said, hey, please do this, I'm still not going to do it for you. But I have done a lot of research on this particular piercing and have a pretty good working knowledge. So we're going to go through some of that today and what I do know about it, because this video has been requested a number of times. So first off, we should probably talk about exactly what is an Ampallang piercing. An Ampallang piercing is a horizontal piercing that passes through the crown or glands or cranial of the actual penis. It's done horizontally. There are kind of two main placements. There is what's considered the European placement, which is perpendicular and goes straight through the urethra from one side to the other. And then there's the American version, which is a little further back, more towards that cornea or the crown of the glands, and higher above the urethra. There's some advantages and disadvantages to each. With the European version, you're probably going to have a faster healing time and less issues, partly because it breaks that super long piercing into 2 short piercings. So they tend to heal a little faster than going from one side all the way into the other, to the middle, and reconnecting. Instead of that, you have 2 piercings kind of healing at the same time, kind of like an industrial of sorts. Actually, it is kind of an industrial in sorts. Yeah. The other thing with the European is that it seems to be less likely, from most of the research that I've done, to migrate as much as the American. The American is kind of known to do this kind of tilting and moving and shifting that the European isn't, just basically because of that faster healing time, shorter distance of the piercing, and just basically because it's easier to hold it in place, in part because it's going through urethra. Make sense? The history of this piercing kind of is clouded in a few myths here and there. The one documented case is that it was done by indigenous people in the Philippines and Borneo. It was claimed at one point that supposedly this was done to prevent men from sodomizing the women. I don't know if that's true or not. Okay, with all that out of the way, let's get into the pros and the cons. Then after that, we're going to talk about what you should know before the piercing is done, what the piercing experience is going to be like, what the healing is going to be like, and living with the piercing, and also if you decide to abandon it, what can you expect? So let's start out with the pros, the advantages. Number one, it enhances sexual pleasure. Most of the people that wear this particular piercing claim that it improves their sensation. With any piercing that is sexual in nature, I always point this out. It's probably not going to be worse. It might be better, but it's probably going to be different. Now, whether or not that's different in a good way or a bad way varies from person to person, and your largest sexual muscle is your mind. There's a lot of rumors and myths about this piercing turning people into, I don't know, sex machines that they, especially women, that they love it, the way it feels, and it hits magical spots and all this. There's no proof to that. In fact, when we'll get into it a little bit more, some women find this piercing extremely uncomfortable, depending on the size of the jewelry. If you don't have the technique to begin with, this is not going to make it that much better, is basically what I'm getting at. Number two, this is a well-established piercing. This piercing has been being done in the modern piercing movement since the 1980s. This is not a new or experimental piercing. A lot of people have healed out this piercing. A lot of people continue to wear this piercing. So it's not going to be something that you really have to be worried about not healing. But there are some things, and we'll talk about those later. Number three, this piercing is extremely easy to conceal. Like all genital piercings, it's a piercing you can have that unless you are pretty much sexually involved with that person or intimate with that person, no one needs to know that you have it unless you tell them or show them. It's easy to hide, especially if you work in a profession where piercings are frowned upon, or you live in a social, or you have a social circle, or culture where it's not acceptable to have piercings. This is an easy one to have, and nobody needs to know about it. Number four, most people do have the anatomy to do this piercing correctly. There's a little bit of different thoughts on whether or not uncut, uncircumcised can get this piercing done. I think it's generally kind of in the same vein as a Prince Albert. If the foreskin is loose enough and there's enough room, it shouldn't be an issue to do this piercing and heal it out. It's one of those things you'll never know until you talk to your piercer about it and possibly get it done. But most people have the anatomy for it. Males, anyway, I guess, or those with male genitalia, penises. Number five, this is not a very common piercing. This is a fairly unusual piercing. It's not as popular as other male genital piercings, so it's not something everybody on the block's going to have. I guess it really depends on what block you're on. Anyway, with the pros out of the way, it's time to move on to the cons, the disadvantages, the things that aren't so great about this particular piercing. Starting with number one, it is one of the most painful male genital piercings there are. Unlike other piercings like Prince Albert's, frenums, scrotums, gishes, etc., this goes through an extremely sensitive part of the anatomy and tends to be a lot more intense than those piercings are. Number two, this one will bleed. Sometimes it'll bleed up to 5 to 6 days. You're going through an area of the body that is very blood rich. So it's not uncommon for this one to bleed a lot, and precautions will need to be taken. Number three, this has a longer healing period than most other male genital piercings, mainly because of the length of it. This is especially true of the American placement that is not through the urethra. It is such a long piercing, it takes a while for it to heal. Number 4, I already kind of alluded to this, but your partner may absolutely hate the sensation of this piercing. They may even go to the point of saying, no, we are not doing that because you have that piercing in. There's other issues, especially or concerns while performing oral sex, etc., that could cause issues too. But mainly, you need to understand that some people do not find this piercing comfortable at all. Number 5, like all male genital piercings or all genital piercings, even after the piercing is healed, because you have hard metal through soft tissue, you are more prone to contracting STDs, meaning that you need to practice safe sex whenever switching partners, no matter how long you've had the piercing. Out of the way, let's kind of talk a little bit about if you've decided you're going to get this piercing, what you should look for when you go talk to your piercer. The first one is they should be well experienced with this piercing in other male genital piercings. They should have a portfolio full of photos of this particular piercing healed, not just done, but healed. The next thing is they should measure the piercing for sizing while your penis is erect. This particular area tends to expand and contract a lot, and it's very important that they size it correctly or oversize it a little bit just to be on the safe side. If it is too small, it's going to hurt and it's going to cause problems. It's very important that it is done while you are erect. During the pre-piercing consultation, they should discuss placement with you, what your options are with your anatomy, what they feel is best, and talk to you about what is going to work best and what their thoughts are on between the two different types of placement, the American version and the European version. Lastly, this should probably not be done, in my opinion, and it shouldn't be done, in my opinion, with a dermal punch. For those who don't know what a dermal punch is, it is a circular kind of tube that has a sharp end on it. It's used a lot with ear piercings, people that want to kind of skip the line and get very large piercings right off the bat. It's a biopsy tool. It takes a chunk of flesh out while it's doing that. The reason why it's important not to use that on this particular style or particular piercing is you're going through the glands and the blood sacs and everything else. So when you take out a section of flesh, there's a possibility that your body cannot constrict that flesh to the point of stopping the bleeding. In theory, if you were done with a dermal punch, you could bleed to death because there's no way for your body to constrict it against the jewelry and close that piercing. These should always be done with either a piercing needle or through the scalping method. Personally, I think the piercing method is a lot more comfortable than the scalpeling, but you should discuss this with your piercer. And if they start to pull out a dermal punch or talk about doing it with a dermal punch, no, walk away. With that out of the way, let's talk a little bit about the piercing experience itself. There's kind of two ways to do this. There's the freehand method. Well, three actually. There's the freehand method, there is the clamp method, and there is the scalpeling method. The clamp method is usually done with Foster forceps, sponge forceps, most commonly used for tongue piercings. It's used to flatten out the tissue and support the tissue while the piercing is done. The other method is it's just done by hand, usually using their non-piercing hand to support the tissue and then injecting the needle in and through. With the scalpeling, it's basically the piercing's done with a scalpel. And the only reason why they do this is to put much larger jewelry in initially. The thing is there is just a point where you can no longer rely on lance tip needles to do piercings. Me personally, I won't pierce anything over 8 gauge. And the reason is you start getting these super long lances that take an extreme amount of pressure and cause a great deal of trauma. Other people seem to have okay with it, 6 gauge and 4 gauge needles. Personally though, if you're gonna go that high right off the bat, scalpeling is the route that you need to go. Though, like any piercing, you can slowly increase and stretch these piercings after they heal. Often this piercing is done in 2 pushes, especially the European style, where they go through into the urethra, stop, then go the rest of the way through. It is an extremely long piercing. In fact, it's probably the longest commonly done piercing on the human body. It takes up a great deal more room than other piercings, and doing that 2 push is sometimes the only way that it can be done properly and cleanly. I've already mentioned this, but any piercing through the glands is going to be the most painful genital piercing you will ever experience. So understand that when you get this pierced, it's got to hurt. Now, this piercing, it's common for them to see heavy bleeding, and that bleeding can last up to 5 days. You should prepare for this beforehand. In most cases, a piercer will take a couple pieces of gauze, put it on the piercing area, and then pull their glove over and then attach it with a rubber band to hold it in place to get you home. It's probably a good idea to have a situation where maybe you have sanitary napkins or pads with you, that you can go straight home and spend the rest of the day just recouping, not doing other activities. The bleeding can last, like I said earlier, I don't know if I did, up to 5 days in some cases. So be prepared for that. This is one of the longest healing piercings as far as taking the longest of all male genital piercings. This and the aphedelia are the two that take the longest. And it is because it is such a lengthy piercing. So this is not a piercing like a Prince Albert where it suddenly feels fine after, in some cases, a week. This is going to take much longer. You're going to have a much longer recovery period. And for that reason, sexual activity is going to be uncomfortable and impaired to a degree during the healing process. This could be anywhere from a week or 2 to a couple months. It varies from person to person. Gentle at first, try different positions, try different activities, because it's not going to feel great at first. Lastly, during the healing period, you do want to use some type of latex barrier. It does not matter how long you've been with your partner. It's important to wear a latex barrier because it's an open wound, and each person has different forms of colony of bacteria, and you don't want your partner's bacteria entering that open wound and giving you an infection. So you should wear condoms during sexual activity, in most cases 6 months to a year after getting this piercing. With the healing process out of the way, let's talk about living with the piercing. With this piercing, because it's so long, it closes pretty rapidly. At least that's what I've experienced with clients that I knew that have had it done and lost an end and needed to get something in it, that it closed pretty damn quick. So you do need to leave the jewelry in on a regular basis. You do want to check the balls for tightness and make sure they're on there tight all the time. It's just one of those things about having this piercing. I don't suggest taking the jewelry out and leaving it out for days on end. And it is best to leave the jewelry in during sexual activity. But like I mentioned earlier, your partner may not like it. Like I said, this piercing might be uncomfortable for your partner, and they may make you take it out or cut you off, so to speak. Also, there's a lot of concern of when receiving oral sex, the jewelry doing damage to teeth. So do take that into account and do discuss that, especially if you're with a long-term partner, and be prepared to encounter a situation where it's kind of like, no, or you're taking the jewelry out. You are more acceptable to STDs even after the piercing heals. It is hard metal through soft tissue. There's always a possibility of causing slight tears, and then you have an exchange of a virus or microorganism, and you contracted STD. Every time you switch partners until you've both been properly tested, you need to use some type of latex barrier. Now, abandoning the piercing. What's going to happen if you take that jewelry out? This piercing will probably close fairly rapidly, but it will look open for a long period of time. You'll be stuck with 2 indentation scars on each side, of course. The holes will probably be, those indentation scars are going to be about the same size as the jewelry or the hole that the piercing was done at. However, it'll probably close pretty rapidly. Not a lot of things you need to do for it. Just let it do its thing. Well, that's all I have to say on Ampallang piercings today, and the pros and the cons and everything else we covered. If you found this informative, if you found this helpful, give us a thumbs up. Let me know that you liked it, because we like it when you like it. If you would like to see more videos like this one and support the channel, subscribe. Hit that notification bell so that you're notified every single time we post something. If you like merch, you like t-shirts, you like fanny packs, you like leggings, you like throw pillows, check out our merch store. Lots of different types of merchandise there, lots of different styles, colors, and etc. Links in the description. There's also one of those merch bars. Till next time, here's hope the only piercing skill with ease and without a single issue. And if you're in the Des Moines, Iowa area, I hope to see you for your body piercing needs in the future. Have a good day, everybody. Thank you for watching. Tomorrow's voting day, so please get out and vote. I'm voting. Everybody else should if you haven't mailed in already. You know, choose your leaders.